Uncle Richard didn't view family as a bond. He viewed it as a portfolio. As a mid-tier real estate developer specializing in generic, overpriced luxury townhomes, his favorite pastime was reminding the rest of the family exactly how much larger his bank account was than theirs. The conflict started 3 months after Grandpa passed away. In his will, Grandpa left his modest, beautifully hand-built lakeside cabin and woodshop to his grandson, Leo. Leo was a practical, quiet carpenter who had spent his childhood learning the trade at Grandpa's workbench. The cabin sat on a gorgeous, sloped 2-acre plot overlooking a pristine mountain lake. The problem was that Uncle Richard owned the vacant 4-acre lot directly up the hill. And Richard had a plan. He wanted to clear-cut the hillside and build a sprawling 3-story luxury vacation rental with an infinity pool. On a chilly October morning, Richard marched down the hillside trail, flanked by a man in a sharp gray suit holding a clipboard. Leo was outside his shop, carefully planing a piece of local walnut wood. "Leo, my boy," Richard called out, his voice carrying that booming, fake jovial tone he used when he was about to screw someone over. "Got some bad news from the surveyor. It turns out your old man's woodshop is a legal nightmare." Leo stopped planing and wiped the sawdust from his hands. "Morning, Richard. What are you talking about?" The man in the suit, Richard's corporate attorney, stepped forward, handing Leo a thick stack of legal documents stamped with a county seal. "Mr. Vance, a recent GPS grid survey indicates that the western eave and foundation of your woodworking structure encroaches onto your uncle's property boundary by exactly 36 inches. A 3-foot violation." Richard leaned against Leo's workbench, a smug, pitying smirk on his face. "It's a real shame, Leo, but my investors can't clear the title for the new rental with an encroachment. So, legally, you've got 2 choices. You can completely demolish the woodshop by December 1st, or you can buy out that 3-foot sliver of land from me for $80,000. Leo stared at the number on the paper. $80,000 was more than he made in a year of custom carpentry. $80,000? For a 3-foot strip of dirt on a steep hillside? Richard, this shop has been here since 1968. Grandpa built it with his own hands. It's not hurting your development." "Business is business, kiddo," Richard chuckled, patting Leo's shoulder condescendingly. "Strict structural boundary enforcement. Follow the letter of the law, or my legal team will have the county seize the cabin to cover the damages. You've got until the end of the month to comply." Leo watched his uncle strut back up the hill. His chest burned with a deep, silent rage. But instead of panicking, Leo did what any good carpenter does when facing a complex problem. He went to look at the blueprints. That night, Leo dragged Grandpa's old iron-bound trunk out from beneath the cabin crawlspace. Inside were the original 1950s deed documents, hand-drawn zoning maps, and a massive, leather-bound county registry book from when the lake grid was first established. Leo spent hours reading the tiny, faded print of the original land grants. By 3 a.m., his eyes stopped on a heavily stamped, forgotten historical addendum from 1962, signed by the county magistrate. A slow, beautiful smile spread across Leo's face. Uncle Richard's lawyers had been entirely correct about the 3-foot encroachment. However, they hadn't bothered to read the ancient zoning bylaws attached to that specific hillside. Because the slope was classified as a critical watershed gradient, the 1962 clause explicitly stated that if any adjacent landowner legally demanded a strict structural boundary enforcement to alter an existing building, the demanding party would automatically and irrevocably assume 100% of the environmental runoff, drainage maintenance, and structural retaining liabilities for both affected plots. In short, by legally forcing Leo to move his building, Richard was legally volunteering to inherit the entire mountain's drainage problems. Leo didn't hire an expensive lawyer. The next morning, he walked down to the county courthouse, signed the formal consent decree presented by Richard's legal team, and agreed to completely remove the encroachment by the deadline. When Richard found out, he told the entire family about it at a Sunday dinner. "The kid didn't even fight it," Richard gloated, sipping his wine. "Told you he didn't have the stomach for real estate. He's tearing his own shop down." Leo sat at the end of the table, quietly eating his mashed potatoes, saying absolutely nothing. The next week, Leo went to work. He didn't tear down the whole shop. Instead, he carefully built a brand new, heavily reinforced, completely waterproof interior wall, exactly 37 inches inside the old structure. Once the new structural wall was secure, he took a chainsaw and heavy demolition tools and sliced exactly 3 feet off the exterior of the building facing the hill. He poured a small concrete curb to cap his new boundary line, leaving a clean, wide gap. What Richard didn't realize, because he had never spent a single day working with earth or wood, was that the heavy stone foundation of Grandpa's old wood shop had been acting as a massive, accidental retaining anchor for the entire mud-slicked hillside for over 50 years. It held back thousands of tons of loose shale and wet clay. By removing those 3 feet, Leo had perfectly unanchored the slope. On November 12th, a massive late-autumn atmospheric river hit the valley. It dumped 6 inches of torrential, blinding rain across the mountain in less than 48 hours. Leo sat comfortably inside his cabin, sipping hot coffee, listening to the roar of the rain against his tin roof. Up the hill, Richard's construction crew had already excavated the massive, deep dirt foundation for his luxury rental, leaving the raw hillside exposed. At 3:14 a.m., a deep, rumbling groan echoed through the valley. Without the foundational anchor of the old wood shop to hold it back, the saturated mud on the boundary line liquefied. A massive, slow-motion landslide triggered exactly where the 3-foot encroachment used to be. The mud-slick completely bypassed Leo's newly fortified, set-back wood shop, finding the path of least resistance. Thousands of tons of wet clay, rocks, and debris roared down the hill, sliding straight into Uncle Richard's development site. It completely buried his newly poured concrete foundations, snapped his expensive steel structural beams like twigs, and pushed 2 of his commercial excavators directly into the protected lake. On Monday morning, the rain had cleared, leaving a beautiful, crisp blue sky. Leo walked outside to find his cabin and shop completely untouched and perfectly safe. Up the hill, however, looked like a war zone. Uncle Richard was standing in the mud, surrounded by county environmental officers, state park rangers, and a very stressed-looking insurance adjuster. The lake was ringed with yellow biohazard booms to catch the leaking oil from his buried machinery. "Leo!" Richard screamed, stomping down the hill, his expensive leather boots caked in brown sludge. "You did this! Your demolition caused a structural failure of the slope. My insurance company says they won't cover it because it originated from your property line. I'm going to sue you until you're living in a tent." Leo calmly reached into his flannel shirt pocket and pulled out a laminated copy of the 1962 zoning addendum, along with the consent decree Richard's own lawyers had drafted. He handed them to the lead county environmental officer standing nearby. "Actually, Richard," Leo said smoothly, leaning his shoulder against his freshly painted shop wall, "according to the county registry and the strict structural boundary enforcement you forced me to sign, the moment you legally mandated the alteration of the original foundation, you assumed absolute, sole liability for the watershed gradient and hillside drainage." The county officer read the document, his eyes widening. He looked up at Richard. "Mr. Vance, this document is ironclad. You legally assumed the structural retaining liability for this entire slope. That means the landslide damage, the destruction of your own site, and, more importantly, the $3 million environmental fine for leaking commercial hydraulic fluid into a protected public lake is entirely your responsibility. Richard's face went from a furious red to a hollow, ghostly white. He turned to his attorney, who was frantically looking at his tablet. The attorney took one look at the 1962 statute number, closed his eyes, and slowly shook his head. "Richard," the attorney whispered. "He's right. We signed it." The financial fallout was catastrophic. Uncle Richard's development company couldn't absorb the multi-million-dollar environmental cleanup fines. Within 3 months, his company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and the bank foreclosed on the vacant 4-acre lot up the hill to liquidate his assets. At the public auction on the courthouse steps, Leo walked in wearing his grease-stained work jeans. Because the land was now flagged as an environmental recovery zone, no commercial developers would touch it. Leo bought the entire 4 acres back from the bank for exactly $4,500, using the money he had saved by not paying the $80,000 buyout. The following spring, Leo used the lumber from the cleared hillside to rebuild his woodshop, expanding it to twice its original size, right on the land his uncle had tried to steal from him. And every time he looks up the hill, he smiles at the perfect, exact boundary line.